Most JRPGs of the past are not very engaging. Similar formulas were used for gameplay, usually within the battle system. This design philosophy would then bleed into game-making tools like the RPG Maker. Even though these games had colorful worlds and diverse characters, their moment-to-moment gameplay loop left a lot to be desired. And if you have ever felt bored playing a JRPG, even though you wanted to love it, this is probably why. In this episode, I want to show you what's missing, why it matters, and how small design changes can completely transform an experience. This video is not about unfairly criticizing JRPGs, for I love this genre. It's about improving and expanding the genre. Hi, I'm Lorden. Welcome to Mind Behind Media, and let's talk about JRPGs. Most games follow gameplay loops and also gameplay chains, a term I have to give Indie Game Clinic credit for. Roughly speaking, there are three loops in most games. There's the core loop, or second-by-second gameplay, the progression loop, or minute-by-minute gameplay, and the meta loop, or hour-by-hour gameplay, often with a long-term goal at the end. In Super Mario Bros., the core loop is jumping over obstacles and defeating enemies usually by jumping on them. The progression loop is beating a level, and the meta loop is completing all levels and saving the princess. You are always doing something, always reacting, always engaged. Now compare that to the average JRPG. What are you doing second to second? Walking, reading, waiting for a random encounter. In my opinion, JRPGs have four categories of game interactions. Exploration. Going through towns, speaking with NPCs, exploring the world and gathering items. Preparation. Buying items, healing up, equipping new gear and distributing skill points. Combat. Fighting enemies and gaining money and experience. And narrative. Experiencing the stories by reading text, or watching cutscenes, and also world building. The problem with the JRPG genre is that the second-by-second gameplay loop is almost non-existent, because all the former mentioned four categories rely on a slower pace. Even the minute-by-minute gameplay loop is not always present, unless you have random encounters every few steps. But that is not, and never has been, good game design. If you break it down, you could conclude that the JRPG gameplay loop is not very engaging. The formula of Japanese-style role-playing games and actual JRPGs has not changed that much in the last, 40-odd years. You walk through what often feels like endless stretches of wilderness with not much happening. You have combat encounters here and there, and you speak to townspeople. It was like that in the 80s, in the 90s, and in the 2000s. It is a rather bare-bones game genre unless the combat system is pretty interesting or unique, the story or the characters within that story are very engaging, or the world building is exceptional. Those three aspects are often the reason why people play JRPGs, besides the presentation. I am excluding minigames here because they are not always present within a game. Since RPG Maker games rely on the same set of loops as JRPGs, they share the same limitations. In addition to that, they often are made by one person or a small team and can't reach the same level of presentation as the AAA games of the past. Today I want to talk about the RPG Maker game. Weird and unfortunate things are happening by the developer Unity, and how this game breaks a typical JRPG mold. Weird Things, as I will call it from now on, is a turn-based RPG made with the RPG Maker VIII. Instead of using purely random encounters, the game uses an encounter rate bar. If this red bar fills up, a combat encounter with 2 to 5 enemies starts. If you flee from fights often enough, the bar turns from red to yellow and fills up much more slowly. The same happens if you are over-leveled for the area you are currently in. In dungeons, you can see the enemies and choose your encounters for the most part. This gives you more control over when the battle starts. Throughout the world, you can collect healing orbs. They restore a small amount of HP, but more importantly, they reduce the encounter bar. That way, collecting healing orbs is a strategic decision. You now have to decide where you can go, whether you can or cannot reach an item before a fight starts, and whether you are prepared for the next fight or not. For every step brings you closer to a combat encounter. By adding a collecting mechanic, the developer introduces a new dimension into the gameplay loop, and you as a player become more attentive. After each fight, you receive odals, a secondary form of experience used to unlock skills. Every character has their own skill tree with different abilities. You can also find odals in the game world, which further expands the collecting gameplay. This adds another layer to the classic RPG Maker formula without adding too much complexity. We as humans are hunter-gatherers, after all. Combat in RPGs satisfies the hunter instinct. JRPGs contain a gathering element by finding treasure chests and collecting loot, but integrating collecting more deeply into the gameplay loop enhances the satisfaction of this instinct even further, especially if the collected items can be used as materials to craft weapons and armor. You see, your job as a game developer is to move away from generic JRPGs or RPG Maker design. The more second-by-second gameplay you add, the more you move away from that cookie-cutter structure. In other words, your job is not to copy a genre. Your job is to expand it. Most JRPGs are built around minute-by-minute and hour-by-hour progression systems. But when you add meaningful second-by-second interactions, you create urgency, tension, agency. And agency is what keeps players engaged. We are wired to respond to immediate feedback. We are wired to react to danger. We are wired to gather, hunt, and manage risk. When a game activates those instincts constantly, not occasionally, but constantly, it becomes more compelling. If you're making an RPG, especially within the RPG Maker, ask yourself, what is the player doing every second? Not every minute, not every hour, every second. If the answer is walking and waiting, there's room for improvement in your project. A small mechanical tweak, a bar that drains, a resource that must be managed, visible enemies instead of random encounters. All of that can fundamentally change how a game feels. One could argue that RPGs have a slower pace to tell a more involved story. A slower pace can help the player slow down and engage more with the narrative, or to show the player the amazing world that they are in. And sometimes an entire genre demands a slower pace, to strategize and to think about your moves. Turn-based strategy games are a good example for that. However, most JRPGs don't always use that opportunity. The narrative is told in either cities or in cutscenes. The game worlds are often medieval fantasy and rarely something special. And combat strategy frequently relies on weak points and simple mechanics like rock, paper, scissors. Something like fire beats plant, plant beats water, water beats fire. Increasing interactivity doesn't ruin the slower pace. It simply makes the game more engaging. You don't need a bigger story. You need more interaction, more engagement. Another great example of how you can improve the stale RPG Maker formula is the German game Kälte, which means cold or coldness by developer Don Sella. If you don't know any German, that's not a problem. I know a little German, so I can explain this one. The game was made with the RPG Maker 2003, and the entire gameplay loop revolves around surviving the cold. A bar is constantly decreasing, and if it reaches 0, it's game over. You must search for firewood to create campfires and prevent yourself from freezing to death. When you light a campfire, the bar refills completely. The bar only stops decreasing in the game menu or in combat. This creates a second-by-second gameplay loop of constant movement. If you don't move, you die. The minute-by-minute gameplay loop is fighting animals, native to that region in the game. Defeated animals drop meat and that meat can be cooked over campfires. Cooked meat is the only healing item in the game that restores HP, which makes it important for your survival. The meta goal is simple: survive long enough to escape the cold region. This way, walking isn't just walking, it's resource gathering and surviving. It also progresses the little bit of story that there is in the game. You're always thinking, how far can I go? Do I have enough firewood? Can I risk this fight? The core loop becomes more tension driven, and that tension transforms the basic JRPG framework into a survival experience. Same engine, same structure, but completely different engagement. By adding coldness and survival mechanics into the game, developer Don Seller turned a simple JRPG into a survival game with RPG elements. A simple tweak, but an incredibly effective one. And you can do the same. By expanding the RPG formula, you can create something fresh and unique. Most JRPGs aren't boring because of their stories. They are boring because their core loop lacks any tension. Improve the second-by-second gameplay, and you will improve the experience. And once you understand that, you will never design passive gameplay again. If there are any simple tweaks you would like to share with us, please leave them in the comments section. I would love to hear your opinions. Now go out and create something new and beautiful. And never forget that saying RPG games is for losers. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.